Okay, so hello, thanks for coming. This is the third event in our 2016 Summer Festival of Pedagogy Pop-Ups. I'm quite excited about this one. Maybe you can tell. So this one is about the 10 things that an adult needs in order to learn a second language. So I'm going to try and cover 10 things in 10 minutes. And I'm limiting myself to only those linguistic and pedagogical things which I think research suggests a person needs, not the nice-to-haves. So we'll begin. 10 things in 10 minutes. So by linguistic, I mean the language itself, the content matters, so what is the person learning? And by pedagogical, I mean what the learner needs to do. So the learning process, how does a person learn? And I should note that just because this list is short doesn't mean that its contents are quick or simple or easy. So first of all, I want to suggest that linguistically, learners need to understand use and form. So by use, I mean that if learners can recognize how and when linguistic structures are used, they'll start to understand what meanings people attach to them, as ultimately meaning derives from use. And we know from research as well that meaningful practice tends to lead to longer-term gains. So for example, the word mouse can mean different things depending how it's used. It could mean the animal, could mean the computer tool. Meanings can change according to how words are used. It could have positive or negative associations, so quiet as a mouse versus timid as a mouse. It could refer to a generic thing or to a specific thing, for example, a person's name, Dr. Mouse, for example. And if I scream it while I'm in the kitchen, you would immediately be conscious of an abrupt change in my emotional state. So clearly the use of language is very important in making sense of it. And by form, I mean how a word or a phrase or a structure or a passage of text is actually constructed. So either written or spoken. For example, mousetrap. We know that that structure has two nouns and it makes a compound noun. So we know something about the form of its word parts. We know its spelling, M-O-U-S-E space T-R-A-P. We know that it has a regular plural form, so it's mouse traps, not mice trap. We know that its spoken form has two syllables, one per word. First one's usually more prominent, etc. So if use and form are what to learn, then that still leaves 8 things on our list related to how to learn. So let's start with 3, motivation, and 4, opportunity to use the language. So to paraphrase Pitt Corder, given motivation and exposure, it's inevitable that a person will learn a language. And this is a bit of a chicken and egg situation because it's often hard to tell whether opportunities to use the language spark the motivation or whether motivation to practice prompts the learner to find opportunities. But either way, both are required in order to learn a second language. Closely related to motivation, the learner needs goals. So these could be short-term or long-term, but with no idea of the destination, the learning journey will probably be more difficult. So the focus of study needs to be relevant to the learner's real-life needs, whether immediate or future. And assuming that a learner has identified goals and has the motivation and the opportunity to try and reach them, the learner will also need, number 6, feedback on their attempts. And I mean to interpret this quite widely, so feedback could come from a teacher or a guide of some sort. It could also come from peers, and that doesn't have to mean other learners, it could mean other users. So if I try to use my second language, for example, to buy something in a shop, and the staff don't understand what I'm asking for, then that in itself is a type of feedback. It's real-time, live feedback on my use. So that's 6. And the next 3 requirements are very closely interrelated. So number 7 on my list is repetition. It's not enough to read or hear the word mouse once in a book or in a conversation. Learners need repeated exposure and repeated production, and they need it in different contexts. So unfortunately, before you ask, there's no widely agreed number of how many times someone needs to encounter a new word or phrase or structure in order to remember it. but we do know that they need to meet it again and again and again. Repetition alone, though, is not enough for our 8th ingredient in learning, which is memory. So learning, remembering, and forgetting all exist in quite a complex dynamic, but we know that there is a crucial link between memory and learning, and we know from research that successfully remembering something increases the chance that we'll successfully remember it in future. We also know from research that simply studying items again is not enough. Memory, like so many things in life, is best strengthened by testing. And that means trying to remember. For example, when taking a test. Research suggests that in terms of remembering something, the most effective way is to have that memory tested and receive feedback on whether you got it right. And interestingly, if you didn't get it right, this feedback is even more important in order to make those weak items stronger. Arguably, to learn something in the first place, number 9, we need to notice it. And some researchers argue that actively noticing makes all the difference between input and intake. So exposure itself, again, is not enough. Learners need to pay conscious attention to what they're exposed to. And they also need to notice the gap between what they can do or what they know and what proficient users can do or know. And so finally, number 10 on my list is tolerance of ambiguity. And this refers to a person's capacity to feel comfortable with situations or stimuli that don't offer enough cues to be easily categorized or structured. So for example, when a situation is completely new and unfamiliar, or exceptionally complex, or contradictory. Essentially, it's when we encounter something and we don't quite know what to make of it. So those of us with experience of learning a second language will know very well how often we find ourselves in such situations. And the ability to tolerate this ambiguity, to not be constrained by what we expect, but just to deal with what we find, may well be a key characteristic of the good language learner. So those are my top 10. Of course, there are other circumstantial and environmental factors which will undoubtedly benefit the learning experience. Things like comfortable temperatures, chairs and tables are quite helpful, not too much background noise, not being so hungry during a lesson that you can't concentrate, and so on. In terms of materials design, obviously you also need other things to support the teachers or the learners who are using them. So for example, we need to consider accessibility features so that people with specific learning differences can also use those tools. So today I've tried to limit myself to those things which are absolutely universally essential. And those are use, form, motivation, opportunity, goals, feedback, repetition, memory, noticing, and tolerance of ambiguity. The idea for this list is to provide ELT practitioners like us with a kind of sense check when we're considering new ideas, so that we always put learning, rather than one particular medium or one particular method, at the heart of what we do. Thank you very much.